Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. You're free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. And if you are so inclined, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and set your notification bell accordingly so that you can get new videos as they are released. And if you're also so inclined, you are very welcome to share all my videos as you see fit. Well, today I'm doing a little bit of a different kind of video for me. I'm experimenting with a little bit of editing software, and I'm also experimenting with doing a little bit of reaction to certain things and concepts that people have. And today I'm reacting to a video by PragerU about separation of church and state, and it kind of leads from a discussion we had on Friday. One individual left a comment about, because my whole point of separation of church and state is it is a two-way street and it is a big wall. But today, PragerU, I think either today or yesterday, came out with a video about separation of church and state. And of course, they make some very bold-faced comments that I find not only very wrong, but debatable and matters of opinion. So I'm going to basically react to this video and stop it where I feel it's necessary and offer my own commentary. But we'll see in a minute exactly what this is all about.
Almost everyone has heard of the doctrine of the separation of church and state. Most Americans believe that it's in the United States Constitution. But there is no such phrase in the Constitution, and there never was.
All right, at this point, I want to point out that he is very correct. The Constitution does not have the phrase separation of church and state in it. However, like many constitutional concepts, and I would argue theological concepts, just because something is not in the source document doesn't mean that the concept doesn't exist. For instance, in theology, there is this notion of this thing called the Trinity. You would be very challenged to look through the Bible and find any reference to the word Trinity at all. And this was an argument that I often heard JWs give me when they would say, the word Trinity doesn't appear in the Bible, and my response was, neither does Kingdom Hall. There's a lot of words and a lot of phraseology in a lot of source documents that doesn't appear. It doesn't mean that the concept within that document doesn't exist. In the case of separation of church and state, I would say that the First Amendment does two things. On the one hand, it says Congress cannot establish any religion, as something that is a religion of a state, or in so doing, giving any kind of special privileges to religion either. And on the flip side of that, they also can't interfere with the free exercise of any religion. So that's kind of where the idea comes from, is actually from the First Amendment, but I'm fairly certain that Prager is going to argue something a little bit differently than what I am. So here we go.
For a simple reason. The Founding Fathers never intended for church and state to be completely separate. They saw religion, specifically religions based on the Bible, as indispensable to the moral foundation of the nation they were creating.
I have to stop there. There's also a few other things that are not in the Constitution. There is no reference to Christianity. There's no reference to the Bible. Unlike the Declaration of Independence, there's absolutely no reference to a creator of any kind whatsoever. If we're going to argue that the idea of separation of church and state doesn't exist in the Constitution, we have to also argue that those things that you're arguing for, sir, also don't exist in the Bible or in the Constitution. And as such, they are also irrelevant. What the Founding Fathers believed about things, though, you are very grossly misrepresenting. The vast majority of the Founding Fathers were deists. They certainly didn't believe in much about the Bible. A good chunk of the Founding Fathers had actually quite a disdain for biblical literature, in the sense that they felt that a lot of it was very amoral. One of the Founding Fathers that does not, I repeat, does not have a monument anywhere in Washington is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine probably was more influential in raising up the colonies with revolutionary theory with his book Common Sense than any other person, and yet he doesn't have a monument to himself. And the only real reason is when you read Thomas Paine, he was most definitely probably an atheist, or at least at the very best for your sake, an agnostic. Thomas Jefferson certainly was not a Christian believer. When you go around the table of the founding fathers, the vast majority have had the disdain for religion, and they had a very skeptical eye towards the Bible. You're very much, sir, misrepresenting what the founding fathers were. They were a very different and diverse group of people. But the one thing that was for damn sure is that they did not trust religion. In fact, if you look at the conflicts and the various court cases that exist between the first 4 or 5 presidents and a lot of the religious institutions, it was the religious institutions were trying to weasel their way into government, and those 5 presidents would basically shut them down. It's not until Andrew Jackson rides in on a wave of the Second Great Awakening, in religious terms, that religion really starts to dominate the country and its mindset. But in the original thing, it really wasn't. The Constitution creates a secular state. In fact, the only reference to religion in the Constitution is that religion cannot be used as a litmus test for public office. That's it. There is no reference to God, a creator, the Bible, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, anything. And all those things existed. It's just not really all that great. I'm sorry, but that is a very broad brush, very big mischaracterization of the founding fathers. And quite frankly, it's almost dishonest. I would highly recommend to you, sir, that maybe you pick up Andrew Seidel's The Founding Myth, because he well documents this. I can't remember how many chapters he has in his book, but almost every one of them is documented with at least 35 original sources, or as close to original as possible, when discussing this issue. And the fact of the matter is, the founding fathers had no such concept of a Judeo-Christian ethic. You want to talk about something that hasn't existed very long. The first time the idea of Judeo-Christian ethic even occurs is in the 50s, and it's probably because Ike used it. And that's just the reality of it. The fact of the matter is, you're going to quote a few guys in the 50s talking about this in opposition to what you're going to talk about. You need to understand that that opposition was kind of rather unique as well when it comes to the thing. I think you're painting a very broad brush here with what the founding fathers were. But I'll tell you this. A good chunk of them were deists, and most of them thought religion was bunk. And a good chunk of them thought that the Bible was bunk, that it was just no more mythology than the Greek myths or anything else. And that's just the reality of it. You know, I mean, you can revise history all you want, but that doesn't change what happens.
Creating. So where does that phrase come from? It comes from one brief letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802. At the end of a very long sentence in which Jefferson affirms his conviction that religious belief should be a private matter and that the government should not interfere with such matters, he uses the phrase, building a wall of separation between church and state. And that's where the phrase lived, undisturbed, lost in Jefferson's voluminous correspondence for almost 150 years.
Okay. Thomas Jefferson is revered as one of the great founding fathers of this nation. To think that any part of his correspondence or his writings was somehow lost and forgotten from 1802 until today is just wishful thinking at best. The fact is, he was the 3rd president of the United States. A lot of his stuff was recorded. The idea that somehow nobody ever referenced this letter is just shocking to me. That is a complete mischaracterization. The idea of separation of church and state may be a Jeffersonian concept that goes way back. It still doesn't change the fact of whether or not it applies to the Constitution or not. Just because it's old and just because it's in your mind a lost bit of correspondence doesn't change the fact that it still might be a valid way to look at the Constitution. I'm sorry, the early government fought long and hard to keep religion out. The religions were always trying to get their state religion in or their state religious concept in. And the founding fathers beat the living crap out of that. And the first few presidents fought that tooth and nail, and that's just true. I'm sorry to think that somehow Thomas Jefferson's writings weren't digested early and gone over early and regurgitated early and used in those contexts to talk about those things. But it's not just that. I'm not trying to be rude here, but they were Enlightenment thinkers, and a great chunk of Enlightenment thinking revolves around the fact that religion is garbage. That many of the tenets of religion couldn't be proven with rationality. And that most certainly dominated the Founding Fathers. So this idea that you have that somehow, there's no record that the Bible, at the Constitutional Conventions where the Constitution was framed and later the Bill of Rights, there's very few references actually to religion. And mostly in the context of how do we keep religion from influencing the government. We want this, like it or not, they certainly practically went toward the direction of separation of church and state.
But more on that in a moment. First, let's discuss what the Constitution actually does say about religion and its role in public life. The answer is found in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's plain what those words mean. The federal government could not establish a national religion, the common practice in Europe. The United States was going to be different. Americans would be free to follow the religion of their choice. When James Madison first proposed what eventually became the First Amendment, his original wording was that no religion shall be established by Congress. But that language was later modified after it was pointed out that this might be taken to mean that the government, including the state governments, had no interest in religion at all. The founders did not want this.
Okay, I'm not as educated on this particular matter as I would like to be, but I could see where no religion shall be established by Congress might be a good way to put it. Except I like the new wording better because it makes it a little bit more timeless and less hardcore. But in any case, I'm not really sure that it changes the meaning all that much. That, Congress shall make no law establishing a religion is just flipping these words. I'm not trying to be rude, but no religion shall be established by Congress, and Congress shall make no law establishing a religion sound to me like the exact same phrase, only flipped around. I'm not really seeing a whole lot of difference here. And many of the Founding Fathers certainly made it very clear that they didn't want religion to influence the government. They had seen the folly of that. They didn't want the church having so much political power that it could cause people to do really dumb things in the name of religion. They had seen wars fought over religion, and they wanted to end that. They didn't want their country going to war over a religious matter. They wanted to end that. And you see that in a lot of the early presidents that they're trying to be dragged into these Christian versus Muslim conflicts, and they refuse to do it. Because they just did not have any interest in that. I don't know. There seems to be a little bit, you're kind of hedging on semantics here, but I really don't see the difference. I just don't.
As George Washington said in his farewell address, religion and morality are indispensable supports of our political prosperity.
I want to make a note there because I don't think people really get the difference. Because for George Washington, you need to note that there's a separation there between religion and morality, because none of the Founding Fathers really felt that religion was inherently moral. They separated the idea of morality and discussions of morality as a rational discourse, not a religious one, because they were also, many of them, of the opinion that religion often led people into what would be called, good people doing evil things in the name of their religion. Today, but they had the similar concept. And so the idea of religion and morality, I also think that quote is edited. I'm not really sure how. I think Andrew Seidel in his book, The Founding Myth, points this out. But the idea that religion was a part of society and morality was a part of society, it should be noted that they considered those two concepts as separate concepts. for discussion. Morality was a completely different discussion than religion, and religion was a completely different matter. So this idea that both of them went hand in hand, you're kind of superimposing on that idea. Washington certainly doesn't seem to have that concept in his other correspondence.
Washington's view remained the nation's view throughout the 19th century and into the 20th, but that changed in 1947.
All right. This is revisionist history at its finest. To think that for 150 years that the nation had one view on religion's place in society is nonsense. The influence of religion went up and down in that 150 years, just like anything else. You had the Great Awakening, where there was a large rise in public fervor. I'm not trying to be rude. He's going to make later the case that morality has gone into the toilet since this one court decision in 1947. Well, what the hell was going on during the 20s and 30s with prohibition? Was morality at an all-time high then? Was it better then when, bootleggers were running gin and cops and people were shooting at each other and killing each other? Do you really think that back then morality was so great? I hate to break the news to you, but right after the American Revolution, from a Christian standpoint, the morality of the nation went into the toilet. I would say it just became very free, and they would have discussions on what was best and proper for morality. The problem I have at this point with this video is this. You're making the assumption that religion and morality were the same and they were intertwined in the concepts of George Washington and many others, but that's not true. Also, there were other farewell addresses by other presidents. Jefferson made no notion of religion, I don't think, in his farewell address, and many others did the same. I simply point this out that this romantic notion that people have that somehow the morality of the nation was always so great up until the time that suddenly this court case in 1947 is going to come up. No, morality went up and down. I mean, you got to remember the 1920s, everybody thought morality was going to hell. We'd had the temperance movement come along and get us all to get rid of our demon rum. But then we turn right around in the 1920s, we have the Roaring Twenties with the flappers and, a very loose moral culture that people decried from the pulpit. The 30s were the Depression. And during the Depression, criminal activity went up, because it was the only way for people to get by. They either had to steal or prostitute or scam or do all kinds of things. This idea that somehow we were a more moral nation in the past is just nonsense. During the Civil War, probably one of my favorite things is hooker. The phrase, why do we call prostitutes hookers? Well, because General Hooker of the Union Army said, I need more prostitutes to keep the men happy, and thus they became hookers. I'm not trying to be rude here, but from a Christian standpoint, the morality of the nation has always been a mixed bag and always will be. There's this romantic notion that somehow things were golden and better in the past. I got news for you. Sometimes they just straight up sucked. And, this notion that many Christians and Judeo-Christian people and people that are Christian nationalists have, that somehow everything was hunky-dory back then. Yeah, bullshit. Not true.
In that year, in the case of Everson versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that under the First Amendment, neither a state nor the federal government could pass laws which aid one religion, aid all religions, or prefer one religion over another. For the first time in American history, the First Amendment was not only about the prohibition of establishing a national religion, it was also about not giving any encouragement to any religion.
Whoa. Okay, that was a very interesting switch there. I would say what the Supreme Court did back there was basically looking at it from this standpoint. Look at this, that neither the state nor the federal government should pass laws which aid one religion, aid all religions, or or prefer one religion over another. How is that not simply redefining what it means to establish a religion? If you give a special privilege to one religion over another, that helps establish them in a society over others. in this nation, Christianity has been given a free pass in a lot of respects, and you can't really deny that. If you try to deny that, that's kind of ridiculous. Prayer at public events, all these things have been taking place for years. You can't aid one religion, all religions, or prefer one. This case at Everson versus Board of Education is landmark because it recognizes the fact that what Everson was fighting against, this idea that somebody could go into a public school and have a Baptist or a Presbyterian or a Lutheran or a Catholic lead people in their religion's prayer at the expense of everybody else sitting in the classroom who may not share that religion. Let me give you an example. Today, it would be like somebody from Islam coming in and leading everybody to prayer, bowing down towards Mecca. How many Christians react positively to that? But that's effectively what people were doing back then. And it basically says you can't do this anymore. You can't pass laws which aid one religion. You can't,
any encouragement to any religion.
Yeah.
The modern strict separation view was born. And where did the 5 justices look for support for their argument? Not the Constitution, because there was nothing in the Constitution to help them, but to that one phrase Thomas Jefferson wrote back in 1802. How ironic that...
No, it's not irony. People look to the Federalist Papers all the time for their decisions in the Supreme Court. People look to what the Founding Fathers could have possibly meant all the time. I hear all the time from the conservative side of the aisle, I wish we'd get back to Founding Fathers, but I'm fairly certain that most people on the conservative side of the aisle don't really understand what that would mean or what it would imply. My point here is this. It's not just in the Constitution. It's those 2 lines. Congress cannot establish a religion, and they can't prohibit the free exercise of a religion. It builds a wall of separation of church and state. You can't give one religion special privileges. And Emerson versus Board of Education was about getting rid of special privileges for certain religions inside the public schools. Okay? And that's what it was about. And quite frankly, even when I was a Christian and atheist, I felt it was a good decision.
The author of the Declaration of Independence, which recognizes the proposition that human beings have inalienable rights from their creator and not from government, was now being used to separate religion from the public square.
Okay, this is not about separating religion from the public square, first of all. You have church buildings on every flipping corner. You're in the public square. You're allowed to preach from your pulpits every day because of the freedom of speech and freedom of religion, that nobody can interfere with you. It's not about taking you out of the public square. It's about having your religious views influence how public policy is done to the detriment of other people of other religions or people like myself who don't have a religion at all. Okay, you don't have the right to impose your religious morality, your Judeo-Christian ethic on everybody else. And for you to twist it like that and turn it around, that's just garbage to me. It's just straight up garbage. I don't have time for that anymore. I'm not trying to be rude here, but that's not what happened. Okay. Yes, talked about inalienable rights endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. But the concept of creator is far cry from a quote unquote God. Okay. Because they didn't really know who the creator was. That's why they were deists. They held the possibility it could be a God, but they were also looking at other possibilities. Who knows? Deism is really an agnostic kind of view in the sense that it deals with the fact that there's a lack of knowledge. And so they react to that lack of knowledge by saying, we don't know. Just because there's a far cry between a creator and the Judeo-Christian God is what I'm saying. And they recognize that. So yes, inalienable rights from their creator. I can still look at that, but I believe my creator is the universe, and I am the product of a Big Bang, which has been scientifically proven to at least be theoretically more stable than any other view of the origin of the universe. Theoretically, we've gone past the point of being, a hypothesis when it comes to evolution. I'm sorry, by becoming a scientific theory, it goes right up there with the theory of gravity and all the rest of it. So from my perspective, my creator is not a divine being, but you can pop anything into that word creator. You're making the assumption that the founding fathers meant a certain type of creator, a specific type of creator. And Thomas Jefferson, who was very irreligious, would not have made that assumption.
For Jefferson and the other founders, religion was central to the entire American project.
No, it was not. In fact, they didn't want religion to be involved in the American project. Sorry, you're wrong.
The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are just two of countless examples where the government acknowledges its debt to God.
God is not mentioned in either one of them. It's not there. You have just done one of the biggest bait and switches in a video I've ever seen, because you do not have any acknowledgement of God, not the Judeo-Christian God for certain. You have in the Declaration of Independence a reference to a creator, which can be anything, and you have absolutely no reference to God or anything but or religion, except one phrase where religion cannot be used as a litmus test. Either religion or the lack thereof cannot be used as a litmus test for public office. That's it. There is no reference to God. There's no reference to the Bible. There's no reference to Christianity. There's no reference to any of that in the Constitution of the United States. There isn't. This acknowledgement that the government acknowledges its debt to God, that is completely made up by you. That is pure grade A opinion by you.
As the famously liberal Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas wrote in the case of Zorak versus Clausen just 5 years after the Everson decision, we are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. The founders would certainly have agreed.
No, they wouldn't have. And quite frankly, I would argue that that justice is wrong.
Following Everson, the nation's moral infrastructure began to crack, at first slowly and then more rapidly. In 1962, the Supreme Court struck another blow. It ruled in Engel versus Vitale that a generic school prayer violated the court's new definition of the First Amendment. Listen to the words of that school prayer. Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. Amen. The prayer was not specific to Christianity or to any religion. Since then, the separation of church and...
Okay, I'm going to talk about this prayer. The fact that you begin with Almighty God makes it religious. You are pressing any religion that believes in a single supreme being can support that. So you have your monotheistic religions. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism would agree with that prayer. I'm going to tell you who doesn't agree with that prayer. Any Hindu would say crap. Okay, maybe they could put in there, but they have an acknowledgement of so many gods that they wouldn't do that. Buddhism wouldn't see it that way. Pagans would not see it that way. These are all religious people, and they would look at that prayer and say, you're imposing your idea of God on me, and you wouldn't be it. Now, I am sitting here as an atheist, which is also a protected class, by the way, under the Constitution, and I'm saying you are not allowed to push your view that there is a God on me either. Sorry, that prayer, if I can be very blunt, is very religious, and it establishes a certain religion. For you to sit there and poo-poo that and say that that's not the case, that's just nonsense.
State metaphor has been used to remove God and religion piece by piece from American public life. Are we a better society for it? It's hard to argue that we are.
I am so tired of this mythology that somehow we're a better society because of religion. When you look at religious societies around the world and societies that are more secular, the ones that have better crime rates and everything are secular ones, not religious. In fact, even in our own country, if you want to know where the crime rates for all crimes are highest, I will simply say, how religious is that state? And the more religious it is, the more likely that there is a crime associated and a rise in crime. Let's take a look at his list here.
Almost every cultural and ethical indicator, marriage rates, birth rates, the number of Americans giving to charity, has declined since God and religion have faded from American life. Meanwhile,
Citation, please. I'm going to say this. The fact that I don't know that marriage rates have declined. I just think that people wait a little bit longer to get married. Birth rates have declined, and that's because a lot of people think it's irresponsible to have 255 kids. Just because the birth rate declines, that's not a moral question, okay? Nor is the marriage rate. Neither one of those are moral issues. Those are personal choice issues. If people are personally choosing not to get married and not to have children, that is a personal choice that they are allowed to make. And it has nothing to do with whether morality has gone up or down based on what. And once again, what standard for morality are we using here? I'm failing to see something that's genuinely good. As far as whether Americans giving to charity is an indication of anything, or whether it's just an indication of economic woes or whatever, I really don't see that how those are moral indicators. Since God and religion have been faded from American life, how is it that the vast majority of people are still religious? If religion if God and religion have faded, most people still believe in God and most people still have a religious faith. How then are these moral things going downward? I guess I'm trying to figure out what statistics in the world you're even looking at.
Children without fathers in their lives, behavioral problems in schools, and crime have gone up dramatically.
Okay. That greatly depends on how you define behavioral problems in schools. Some would argue that behavioral problems in schools aren't as bad. Just saying, just pointing that out there. As far as crime goes, I don't know what crime statistics you're looking at, but violent crime has been dropping for a long time. A lot of crimes have been dropping for a long time. I don't know where you're getting this idea of increased crime rate, but you don't give me a source for that either.
All because of one vote in one court case based on one sentence in one letter. On such things do nations in history turn.
Yes, they do. But it doesn't change the fact that in the Supreme Court, a 5-4 decision is a 5-4 decision. You don't have to like that decision. You don't even have to agree with it. But that's how we govern ourselves, okay? And we need to respect it. I don't necessarily, as a libertarian, like all the decisions the government make, but I have to at least give it a begrudging success that it exists. I'm also not convinced that this was a bad court decision. I'm sorry, I wouldn't want my child to go to a school, and this is what was happening back in 1947. And let's say I'm back in my theist days and I go as a non-denominational pastor, or before that as a Pentecostal one, I wouldn't want my kid to go to school, even as a Christian, and then suddenly have a Catholic priest be the one talking to them about religion and leading them in prayer and shoving Catholicism down their throat. I certainly think that the best way to handle that then is just to keep it out of schools altogether. It should be noted that the Emerson case did not eliminate prayer from school. What it eliminated was something very specific. It eliminated the teacher leading prayer in school. Kids can still gather around the cafeteria table, hold hands, and pray. They can bow their head before a test. It doesn't put religious practice out of the public sphere. What it does is it says you can't act as an official of that institution and lead things in prayer. And Christians have long had this privileged status of being allowed to do that. And what Emerson versus the Board of Education did is it really put that into, no, you can't do that anymore. And quite frankly, I think it was a good decision.
I'm John Eastman, professor of law at Chapman University and a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute for Prager University.
And I am wondering how the hell a guy got all those credentials and never actually read the founding documents of how the Constitution was written, because if you had actually written them, you would have understand that a lot of these people just, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but no, it didn't work that way. They were very careful to keep religion out of state business. That's what they wanted. They did build a separate wall of separation of church and state. And just because we have to credit Thomas Jefferson for at least identifying the concept in the Constitution and preserving it. And I don't think that suddenly 150 years later, it was just recognized. I think it was always there and it was always being argued about. And I don't think, I look at this thing and, I'm trying to pull up the description here, but, we got all this subscribe to PragerU, PragerU, a whole bunch of stuff about this and a script. But you know what I don't have is a source document, not one damn source document that shows that the founding fathers believed as you say, not one. I do have a book, a whole book where a man spent years studying all this stuff on my shelf back here that says you're full of crap, okay, with citation after citation after citation after citation. He's not standing alone. Andrew Seidel is not standing alone with his book, The Founding Myth. He actually has honest-to-God research. I get tired of PragerU and you, sir, when you talk like this and you don't leave me any source documents, because it tells me that that you're absolutely BSing everybody. And it really should piss us all off. It really should. I don't know. This is my first attempt at a reaction video. Let me know what you think. I want to thank you for stopping by and welcome to my channel. Comments have a way of influencing the discussion on Friday. And so I will get to comments whenever I can. And sometimes it may be days, trust me. I also want to thank all of you for stopping by once again. Be sure to like, subscribe, and get your notifications set the way they are. Just a reminder, I don't allow name calling in the comments, so just keep that in mind. And hopefully one day I can too make you into a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Rabyd, the Rabid Atheist, saying goodbye and wishing you a good day.